All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you all for putting together this wonderful meeting. It's really exciting. And so I don't do really SDMs, but today I wanted to talk about conservation planning. And this is something that I'm glad that Laura introduced a lot of these concepts before me. So conservation planning is something that is extremely difficult, and it's something that we're trying to tackle with reinforcement learning. Um, Biodiversity conservation planning is complicated by various things. And one of them is that it has to deal with many moving parts. So species are moving because of humans, because of climate change, because of invasive species. So there is lots of moving things in the environments that we want to protect, which should be integrated now in the way we protect the environment, because then we should design, if we want to make future-proof conservation planning, that these are things we should account for. On top of that, biodiversity conservation planning has to consider many different objectives. So, of course, there is species extinction risk, but there is also feasibility. So things have to be actually plausible, financially viable. There has to be coordination with local stakeholders. There are ecosystem services that we want to account for. And of course, there are constraints and targets based on national and international agreements. So there is also things to be considered in this planning. And so, with this in mind, a few years ago, we started a project that we called Conservation Area Prioritization through Artificial Intelligence, CAFIN, which uses reinforcement learning to process biodiversity data along with socioeconomic data in a spatially explicit and temporally dynamic context to identify areas for conservation or restoration. The idea behind this approach is that we essentially built a simulation, a spatially explicit semi-individual based simulation of biodiversity, where species have their own habitat suitability. They have a bunch of traits that describe how well they can disperse, for example, how endangered they are, their growth rates, things like this. Along with this, we have other layers of information, for example, costs. There can be opportunity costs, for example, for protecting areas, land use, things like this. And so we process all of these multi-dimensional data and temporally and spatially dynamic data through our little agent here, which is this little bot here that observes these things through a neural network and tries to make decisions around in this place. So the agent here is basically a representation of the policymaker that looks at this complex environment and tries to decide what to do to achieve conservation targets. So it will process this data through a neural network. It will decide among a huge space of action what to do. And then it will, the action that it will take, for example, I want to protect this particular area, will have an impact on the environment. And this may lead, for example, some species to be better protected than it was before, or it could have no impact and just affect the budget of the agent. Based on the impact that this action has on the environment, the agent will be rewarded either with a positive reward if it achieves something useful, or with a negative reward if it just wasted a bunch of money. So the agent will start playing this game without really knowing what it's doing, but through reinforcement learning, it kind of figures out how to best process all of this data and turns it into the best actions. This is done iteratively, and the policy that the model that the agent implements evolves over time, can evolve over time. So it can like design it every year, for example, a new area to be protected or restored. And to give you an example, this is an experiment that we're doing in collaboration with folks at WSL and in other institutions in Switzerland, where we're looking at biodiversity data and socioeconomic data in Switzerland. And with the idea of achieving a 30 by 30 optimization or protection of nature, looking at plant biodiversity data. So we are integrating present and future climate, which will affect our habitat suitability maps that therefore evolve over time. But we also have proxies for land use, opportunity costs, and of course we have layers of areas that already are protected. And we also have some proxies for ecosystem services. Here we are focusing on plants that support pollinators. So we stack all of this data in our system. We have data for more than 2,000 plant species here, which have their habitat suitability evolving over time. We combine them with all of these other layers of data, and then the agent is trained to maximize the conservation of ecosystem services so the protection of plants and support pollinators, reduce extinction risks, and minimize opportunity costs. So here the reward can be an aggregation of different targets. And so the agent is trained with this data, and it will conditioning on existing protected areas, it will establish new protected areas. And after our training, we can map this. Don't pay too close attention to the actual maps. These are really very much ongoing optimizations that we're doing, but essentially we'll identify an area that reaches the 30 by 30, and it will also project what the conservation status of this 2,000 species is going to look like, what it looks like today, what it may look in the future based on climate change and habitat reductions and so on, and what it could look after an optimization of the conservation action. Now, conservation in Switzerland doesn't actually work like this. So there isn't a single agent that takes, or policymaker that controls conservation across the country. Because conservation policies are actually attributed to the cantonal level. So there is regional governments that decide on conservation. And so we have expanded our framework to have multi or cantonal agents, so regional agents, that each will try to reach its own 30% in their own canton, in their own region, but they act as synergy. So they are trained at the same time to maximize the total reward at the end. And so with this, we can obtain a prioritization that is now implemented by each of these little agents here, in which will therefore spread across the conserved areas across each canton, so that each canton actually reaches its own 30%. Now, because the reward system is an aggregation of different objectives, so we want to reduce extinction risk, we want to maybe maximize ecosystem services, minimize opportunity costs, we can actually play with how much we weigh different components of these rewards to achieve a range of different policies that go from focus more on saving money, focus more on saving biodiversity, focus more on ecosystem services. And this is an experiment that we have been doing with focusing on restoration policies with a reward assigned to cost, carbon, and biodiversity. And here we can explore again a gradient of different policies. And it's not about the bot telling us whether this is better than this one, but it's more about exploring the trade-offs between these different policies. Then I think it's really up to humans to decide what we want to go for. But this is an experiment where we apply these different policies. One focuses more on carbon sequestration and the other one focuses more on biodiversity conservation. This is a data set of 4,000 plant species in the Brazilian Atlantic forest. And we look at optimized restoration sites. And from these optimizations, first of all, we see that the areas are not the same. So if we focus on carbon versus on biodiversity, we will get different areas. But we can also use these simulations to quantify the trade-offs in terms of sequestered carbon, which will decrease non-linearly as we move along this gradient, but also in terms of reduction of extinction risks. So we see that with a policy that actually improves biodiversity in the reward system, we can achieve much better results in terms of biodiversity. So in this case, the agent is the policymaker. So we're training this model where the agent is the policymaker that implements actions in the environment. The other way we are using reinforcement learning is to have the organisms being the agents, and this is more for ecosystem modeling. And so this is the paper that just came out recently, where we are experimenting with, again, a spatially explicit context. In this case, the objective is not to protect nature, but to model an ecosystem. And this is done using multi-agent reinforcement learning again, where the agents in this case are functional groups, are individuals of functional groups. Here we have a simple system with a simple food chain, but in principle, this could scale up to more agents and functional groups. But essentially here we have the wolves, the deer, and the primary producers. And each, so dot in this simulated map is an agent. So there is a bunch of wolves, there is a bunch of deers. And essentially what this agents have to do is they have to learn how to live. So the deer has to learn that it's going to run away from the wolf. The wolf has to learn that it's going to run after the deer to feed and eat. Otherwise, it will die. So we train our models without basically implementing any manually encoded rules. So the model is trained so that the agents learn how to coexist. And once we have a trained model, then we can play with these ecosystems, with these artificial ecosystems. Essentially, each agent will have a perception of their own environment and of themselves, so that we know their level of energy, hydration, how old they are, things like this, and they will observe the environment around them, and with that, they will decide what to do in the next time step. And once we train these models, we obtain, for example, Volterra types of dynamics, even though we didn't encode them, like they just emerged from the system. They just emerge from the fact that the wolf learns how to hunt, but then if it hunts too much, then we will have to wait until the population recovers and so on. Once we have these ecosystems, we can also play with external factors. So if we add, for example, human pressure on this ecosystem, how much hunting can we add in this ecosystem before the ecosystem collapses? And of course, these are experiments that may be difficult to calibrate to real world, but it allows us to see to what extent like adding human pressure will at some point lead to an ecosystem tipping point. So these are just a couple of different ways we are using reinforcement learning to model ecosystems and to use ecosystem models to optimize conservation strategies. And so with this, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Yes.
Does the model take into account spatial context? Because it seems that, like the proposed solution are very patchy. So
the conservation one.
Conservation plan.
If you what? Sorry, say it again.
It looks like the additional proposed areas are very patchy, while we essentially it's very difficult to protect many different small places. So we'd rather have like a large contiguous area. So does your agent actually know about the spatial context so that it can decide based on this actually artifact?
Yes, yeah, of course. So the agent is spatially aware, and then there are ways to, for example, if in the reward system you incorporate connectivity, then you could promote things that are more contiguous. This is a policy optimized by Canton, so that it's already by construction more patchy than it would be if you do it by without any spatial constraints. So this is what we got. I mean, with this preliminary data that is, but it's quite different from this, which is done without spatial constraints. Yeah. But connectivity is part of the system because essentially, if a species doesn't have the chance, if climate is shifting, but the species doesn't, there is a disturbance layer here. So if the species doesn't have the chance to get to the area that is protected, then it will not get there, and the agent will not get the reward.
Valentin?
Yeah. Also for the first part, so you motivated it by saying that conservation actions have to handle many moving parts. Do you think it would be possible to extend it to an adaptive process where the agents iterates over multiple steps at inference, like taking into account like previous conservation actions and deciding on what should be the next one? I say this, it's maybe more relevant, at least for vertebrates, where when you decide on a conservation area, it will affect the distribution of that species. And maybe the next conservation action should take into account that previous.
That's what it does already.
Okay.
Yes. So like you decide how long you want the conservation actions to be distributed along. So like if you give the agent 50 years to reach 30%, then it will have 50 time steps to reach that. And then like the next step will depend on what it did before. And it will have, actually this will come with added value because the agent will learn from what it did before and what was achieved in the previous step. So yeah, that's already happening. It's kind of the point of using reinforcement learning versus like a static optimization.
Yeah, very interesting study. I want to ask, do the population of the agent vary among different species? Like
In the ecosystem
years?
or
Like the population, is an agent like an individual or like it's a like represent the whole species or?
in this system, each agent is an individual, but the brain is shared among all individuals. So
the population vary or within like the population of one species.
Like there's no variation
Okay.
in the behavior within a species. They all behave the same. Do you have within a species, do you have variation in how they might behave?
No. So the only thing that is different between this wolf and this wolf is what they see, because it's based on where they are at that point and like their own energy levels, their own like kind of state.
Cool to add, because we know that there's variation in how species make decisions, right?
Yes. In principle, you could have like, an individual indicator that would just like make each individual be slightly.
And some constraint that they should behave somewhat like their peers.
Yeah. They would still share most of the parameters of the network. So.
And for example, you also have like 100 wolves and 100 deers, like always the same size or a different population size when you do a simulation.
Oh, the individuals die and reproduce.
Okay.
Right? So if the wolf is too efficient, it will drive the deer to extinction, and then the system is not trained well enough, and then it will restart training. So it's trained to reach coexistence so that they can survive forever in principle. So, but the populations do fluctuate. It's like this Log-Cavalterra kind of stuff that I showed. This is how many deer and how many wolves there are. In relative terms.
There's a lot of questions, but we're gonna take like two more. So like, probably you had a question? No? Maybe? I'm just trying to meet the ones that raised their hand earlier. There's time afterwards from time
to ask questions, since it does decide on which areas to protect iteratively. Do you think it would also have the power to kind of guide which areas should be protected earlier than others?
Yes, yeah. So that's so it's not something that we have like really looked into so much, but you can add like kind of a discount factor so that the earliest rewards are the most important ones. And so the model will also have to, or the agent will have to prioritize what's first thing to protect, like to get the best reward right now, and then like because also the future can be less certain. But yes, you already from these policies, you can already map like what the agent protected first and then what he protected later. And you can already look at this, but you can also prioritize getting rewards early on, like the ones that are happening for sure, because like of course we don't really know where the species will be 50 years from now. So the rewards that you collect next year are more likely to actually happen. But yeah.
Last question, Gianfranco.
Yeah, for what concern the grass, for example, like in this example, like do you have also some constraint about, for example, the weather information, because seasonality as well, because the grass may be growing in different way in for example, in the summer and the winter and so on. And then of course I think it will dictate also how, for example, the deer will move as well. Like, do you already enforce it in the policy that you define?
So in this one we didn't, but so of course the deer, if they overgraze here, they will have to go somewhere else to feed because there is no grass until it grows back. So there is already kind of that part, but not the actual seasonality. We are trying to expand this into population-based models where the agents are actual populations instead of the individuals. And we're doing this right now in a marine context, looking at the Baltic Sea, where we have populations of fish and other marine organisms. And there we have seasonality also, like where, for example, reproduction only happens once a year. And then there is like a sort of a cycle that is imposed on the system. Yeah.
Thank you so much.